Most people who talk about design thinking will say, boy, it's really, hot contemporary approach right now, but many are also quick to say, this has been around a really long time. It's just been sort of repackaged and applied in new ways. So I don't know the exact origin, but I know, in the 1950s and the 1960s, in both design environments as well as in engineering environments, this process of, prototyping things and testing things and making sure that your design fits the user was happening again, at that time in engineering and design settings. And then I think a turning point was probably in 1991 when IDEO formed by the Kelly brothers. And so that firm really popularized the approach of designing not just products, but also user experiences and services, whether those are digital or kind of live experiences. And then IDEO also did a really sort of generous job in making their materials and their approach publicly available. And so different corporations and businesses would hire them as consultants to help them innovate within their firms. And so I'd say after engineering and design, and then with the popularization by IDEO and some writings and videos that they produced and whatnot, and sharing their materials, it started to take hold into in some different company settings as people would partner with IDEO and say, hey, can you use your secret methodology there and help us kind of innovate internally? And then I think what's been really interesting over the last maybe 10 years or so is we've seen design thinking move into healthcare settings and into education settings and into the nonprofit sector and the public sector as well. Some of my expertise is in educational psychology. And so one of the reasons why I think design thinking is a natural fit there is because the methodology requires you to embrace some different mindsets that educators have been trying to hone within learners for years. And so in an education setting, we might call this 21st century skills. So getting our students comfortable with taking feedback and iterating their work based on critical feedback and not just doing sort of a one and done, or learning visual and verbal communication skills. And so what's really attractive, I think, to the education field about design thinking is it's a full integrated package of all of those skills. When you think like a design thinker, you are engaging in creative and critical thinking and honing these communication skills and everything. And it's not just a unit on critical thinking, right? It's you get to work with others, learn how to collaborate, work on a team, take feedback, all of these things in sort of a nice package. And I may bounce to Lori to kind of chat a little bit about how we're also seeing this come into healthcare settings as well now recently.
Oh, definitely in healthcare. But I think what I was going to add initially to what Allison said too is we have one of the things that's really cool about design thinking that IDEO, I think, established is that you don't, we have a tendency to work very siloed and we put people that are from the same industry or the same company into this kind of room and we say, okay, innovate. And design thinking really takes the lead in saying, let's make it cross-functional, cross-disciplinary. Let's take people from all areas to work on a shopping cart, for example. A very famous 2020 video on how to redesign a shopping cart had artists and biologists and mechanics and engineers. And I think that to me is also a breakthrough because it is what I think has made it such a success at Bryant is when you look at the leadership team for IDEA, when you look at the course that we teach on advanced design thinking, it's people from different backgrounds. So Allison's in psychology and I'm in management, but we had on our executive team a political scientist and we had someone in communications, and all of those different areas allow you to see the world through a different lens each time and to understand the situation differently. And so when you're really solving the issue, you're solving it more holistically and from different perspectives in ways that maybe I don't normally think. And we get very biased in the way that we think. And what you're seeing now in healthcare is this idea of patient-centric. And instead of just assuming that we can prescribe to the patient or treat the patient as an object, we really understand that we need to design for the patient in mind. And if we're going to design a waiting room, for example, a reception room for someone who has a migraine, or a concussion, do we design it so they get checked in quickly, or do we design it so there's low light and quiet, comfortable chairs and no noise? And, it's a different thought process. And when you design it with the user in mind, you actually create an environment and a product and a service that attracts people, and your business blooms. And so it's really in healthcare now with COVID, and needing that multifaceted cross-functional approach is essential to success. So I think you're really going to see it explode more right now in the center of the pandemic.
I guess I would summarize the hallmarks of design thinking as taking a human-centered approach where you always identify the user or the audience of whatever it is you're designing, so in this case, a course. And then the second hallmark would be this rapid prototyping or an embracing of iteration, that you don't just design the course and wipe your hands clean and you're done, right? So I think with those being the hallmarks, the way I would see the intersections with course design is you would want to really try to build some empathy with your audience. So understand who will be the user of this course. Is it graduate students? Is it professionals who are already spending a full workday before they approach your course? And that would be very different than maybe someone who's a residential undergraduate student taking a course on the same topic. So I think identifying that audience and trying to do your best to take the perspective of what that student values, needs, what they're hoping to get out of the course. And even better than just speculating on that would be to ask them, right? To send them a survey or a Google form or something and say, why did you register for the class? And of course, you're hoping they're going to go beyond, it was required. But what are you hoping to get out of this? And, what would it take for this to be a real success for you at the end of this course? And what are some things that frustrate you maybe about an online course or about a live course or about a large lecture course? Because I think the other thing we really strive for in design thinking is identifying what we call pain points. So not just what are the students looking for and what do they need and what do they value, but what would be very frustrating to them in this course? What would maybe it's something they find confusing, the directions are confusing, or the pace is overwhelming, or the assessments don't seem valid, or something like this. And so anytime that you can really identify the pain points and then do what you can in your power to eliminate those from becoming a reality are great. And then I think, the iteration is seen in course design, because if you're doing it well, you are constantly embracing an iterative approach. So, whether it's even putting on your syllabus or your course plan, this is subject to change at any time as we continue in the course, because maybe you need to spend more time on one topic or you have to pivot in some way. And I think taking formative assessment data from students is also really an opportunity to know whether or not you have to make some changes. So again, getting that user feedback, whether it's a midterm evaluation or even, again, formative assessment. Did you understand these concepts from today? Give them a short poll or something. And then taking that and saying, okay, I shouldn't just move on to my next lesson. I now need to take that user data and make some adjustments to the course design. So I think excellent course design sort of organically embraces these two aspects of design thinking.
I feel like everyone thinks design thinking is just brainstorming. So when you talk about brainstorming, or when you talk about design thinking, they'll say, oh, I did those, I learned those brainstorming techniques. And they think that once you've brainstormed, you're done. And so what's missing, I think, for the biggest piece many people don't, I think, fully appreciate about design thinking is the whole empathy phase. It's starting well before you even start brainstorming. It's brainstorming assumes and we're not even there yet. It's really trying to tell them that we have so many biases about the way we think, and we are so conditioned to be problem solvers sometimes, and we are entrenched in kind of a years of experience, and I know I've seen this before, so I know the answer. And so we jump right into, so give me a couple ideas and we'll brainstorm off of those, rather than saying, wow, let's actually take that beginner's mindset. Let's step back and see the situation from fresh eyes. Let's make no assumptions, which is really, really hard. Let's pay attention, which again is really, really hard. Let's listen actively and engage people in a conversation afterward in order to really figure out what's at the heart of the situation. And because so many companies don't do that, they start at that brainstorming. They're missing key opportunities to design the next Swiffer, or not to design the Keurig cold, beverage machine that was an epic failure. So for me, that's kind of what I always see is people just naturally assume it's just about brainstorming. And so when we pull them back and say, no, you're not even anywhere near ready to brainstorm, it takes them a bit before they agree with us. But then when they see how many ideas they come up with, that by the time they get to phase 3, after 1 and 2, it's illuminating. So for me, that's kind of one of the things I experience a lot.
That's a great one. I think maybe springing off from that, I would say that I think that people mistake it for a linear process. So whether you adopt a 3-phase approach, which IDEO often uses, or we talk about EDIPT, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. And so people think that it's a one-way street. You move from empathize to define to ideate to prototype and then test, and then voila, you're done. And I think for cognition's sake and like executive function, it helps people to think in an organized way. So we often teach it, even as those who don't embrace it as linear, we still teach it in that way. And then we have to remind them and prompt them that it's actually very common, more common, that you would get to a certain phase and then loop back. So maybe you present the prototype to the user and you recognize that it has some failures. So now you not only have to go back and brainstorm, but actually you may have to go back and conduct some more interviews or revisit field research. And that is much more common than embracing simply a linear approach. So I think that's one thing I would say. Another would be that it seems like it's easier than it actually is. And right, so people will say, oh, okay, I just have to brainstorm, or I just need to watch people. Oh, I just have to observe them and take down some notes. But I think one of the unique ways that Lori and I approach design thinking is acknowledging the psychological underpinnings that are at every step of this process, and viewing them as often cognitive or perceptual traps. So Lori already chatted about bias a little bit, but we know from psychology that when you observe things, there's certain things that your attention does not pick up because it's diverted, or that you don't encode certain things. And so, or maybe in a brainstorm, you're fixated on the circus. We could have a circus, we could have an outdoor circus, we could have an indoor circus. And why is it that your brain can only think of circus when, the world is, open to all these possibilities? So when we teach design thinking, we try to expose our students to what are those cognitive traps and biases and pitfalls that are ingrained in us cognitively to make us very efficient if we're talking about navigating our typical daily life. But as a design thinker, these things actually are quite problematic. And so we try to teach some strategies for how you can sort of not fall into those traps or prevent those traps, or even in its simplest form, be aware of the fact that, you might be experiencing fixation right now. So try doing this or that. One example would be in a brainstorm. We talk about, it's kind of a tough name, but we talk about brainstorming defibrillators as a way to get people unstuck if they become fixated. And so we might, generate a deck of cards that have random input, like what would an alien say, or, but what if you were in prison, or how would kindergartners want to do this, or whatever. And so when you can't think of something, you pick a card from the deck, or you have a facilitator say this. So I think one of the things that is not understood about design thinking is that people are quick to say that it fails because they didn't actually embrace the methodology to its fullest, because maybe they did some shortcutting or they didn't acknowledge those traps, and so their observations weren't deep enough or meaningful enough, so then the insights that were built upon those are not strong and are not compelling. And I think then I even have one other third thing, if I could share, that I think is something that people often would be quick to judge about design thinking or misunderstand, is when you see something that looks so fun, it must not be rigorous, and it just couldn't be, farther from the truth, right? So you can use neon Post-its and stickers and markers, and you can be standing on your feet playing music in a brainstorm, and you can still be sweating and so exhausted by the end of this collaborative and iterative process because it is so rigorous. Your brain is just turned on to full throttle throughout the whole experience. And I think if you do it and you see results, as Lori talked about earlier, then that'll win you over.